as loud.
This is it, huh? This is it. This is it. It's Sunday. You gotta go sit down, bud.
It's really high in the house or the overhead. There we go. Hello, hello. It's probably a little high.
Why don't you guys do some brainstorming about things you'd like to do at camp and write down the ideas for the planning people? That's what she did. Write it down. Go talk amongst yourselves. Make sure to include Maddie, please. That's a pretty twirly there.
Situated now? Is your wife here? Yeah. Okay. All right. Good morning. Small crowd. All right. You folks remember what book we're in?
Isaiah.
So what's gone on so far in Isaiah? Anybody recall? So we've looked at chapter 6, chapter 1, chapter 3, and chapter 4.
Oh yes. Destruction.
So chapter 6 was...
Did we get into 6 yet?
Mm-hmm.
Did I miss it?
Oh yes, the vision. Where God sent him.
Yep. So chapter 6 was Isaiah's calling
Oh.
and his first commission. Chapter 1 is Isaiah receives these visions. So remember, he hasn't yet actually spoken to Judah regarding these visions. So what we've been reviewing is basically the Lord revealing these visions to Isaiah, and it's directed at Judah and Jerusalem, which is the leaders, and both the leaders and the people. And he calls to account what they're guilty of, and then he also starts going into the judgment or the results of their guilt, of their accusations. So, and then chapter 4 kind of breaks with a prophecy looking at this plant that will be glorious, and we looked at that as being a prophecy speaking of the Messiah. So we looked at the branch of David. And then it speaks to basically the returning glory of God among his people. So it talks about the smoking cloud that will once again fill the land. So just a brief future view of the Messiah and the returning glory of God. So then in chapter 5, it's similar to a psalm. Starts out similar to a psalm. So let's go ahead and read chapter 5, and then we'll go back through it. So 30 verses. So we'll just have someone do the first 15 and someone do the second 15. So Holly and Val.
I want to sing a song for someone I love. A song about my loved one and his vineyard. My loved one had a vineyard on a very fertile hill. He He dug up its stones and cleared them away. He planted it with choice vines, built a watchtower in the middle of it, carved out in its rock a winepress, expected it to produce good grapes, but it only produced sour wild grapes. Now, citizens of Jerusalem and people of Judah, judge between me and my vineyard. What more could I have done for my vineyards that I haven't already done? Why, when I expected good grapes, did it produce sour wild grapes? Now come, and I will tell you what I will do with my vineyard. I will remove its hedge, its grapes will be eaten up. I will break through its fence, and its vines will be trampled down. I will let it go to waste. It will be neither pruned nor hoed, but overgrown with briars and thorns. I will also order the clouds not to let the rain fall on it. For now the vineyard of the Lord of hosts in the house of Israel and the men of Judah are the plant he delighted in. So he expected justice, but look, bloodshed, and righteousness, but listen, cries of distress. Woe to those who add house to house and join field to field until there's no room for anyone else, and you live in splendor alone on your land. The Lord of hosts said in my ears, many houses will be brought to ruin, large magnificent ones left empty. For a 10-acre vineyard will produce only 5 gallons of wine, and seed from 5 bushels of grain will yield but half a bushel. Woe to those who get up early to pursue intoxicating liquor, who stay up late at night until wine inflames them. They have lutes and lyres, drums and flutes, and wine at their parties, but they pay no attention to how the Lord works and never look at what his hands have made. For such lack of knowledge, my people go into exile. This is also why their respected men starve, and their masses are parched from thirst. Therefore Sheol has enlarged itself and opened its limitless jaws, and down go their nobles and masses, along with their noise and revels. The masses are lowered, the nobles are humbled. Proud looks will be brought down.
But the Lord of hosts is exalted in justice, and the holy God shows himself in holy righteousness. Then shall the lambs graze as in their pasture, and the nomads shall eat among the ruins of the rich. Woe to those who draw iniquity with the cords of falsehood, who draw sin as with cart ropes, who say, let him be quick and let him speed to his work, that we may see it. Let the counsel of the Holy One of Israel draw near, and let it come that we may know it. Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. Woe to those who are wise in their own eyes and shrewd in their own sight. Woe to those who are heroes at drinking wine and valiant men in mixing strong drink, who acquit the guilty before a bribe and derive the innocent of his right. Therefore, as the tongue of fire devours stubble, and as dry grass sinks down in the flame, their root shall be rottenness, and their blossom go up like dust, for they have rejected the law of the Lord of hosts, and have despised the word of the Holy One of Israel. Therefore the anger of the Lord was kindled against his people, and he stretched out his hand against them, and he struck them, and the mountains quaked, and their corpses were as refuse in the midst of the streets. For all his anger has not turned away, and his hand is stretched out still. He will raise a signal for the nations far away, and whistle for them from the ends of the earth, and behold, quickly, speedily they come. None is weary, none stumbles, none slumbers or sleeps. Not a waistband is loose, and not a sandal strap broken. Their arrows are sharp, and their bows are bent. Their horses' hooves seem like flint, and their wheels like the whirlwind. Their roaring like a lion. Their roaring is like a lion. Like young lions they roar and growl and seize their prey, and they carry it off, and none can rescue. They will growl over it on that day like a growling of the sea. And if one looks to the land, behold, darkness and distress, and the light is darkened by its clouds.
Okay. So, chapter 5 starts out, and it's not clear. I mean, it seems to me that Isaiah's basically, having a conversation in his own mind. He starts out saying, I want to sing a song for someone I love. He says a song about my loved one and his vineyard. So he starts speaking of basically the Lord, right? The one he loves, the Lord, and his vineyard. So he says that my loved one had a vineyard on a very fertile hill. So, and he dug up its stones and cleared them away. So he goes into describing, this process that God went through with Israel, and it's interesting that he, starts describing where this vineyard is planted. It's on a fertile hill, and he has to clear, because it's on a hill. He can't go through the standard, process of using a plow to clear the land, to till the dirt. He has to go through by hand with the hoe and clear all the stones to make the soil right for vines. So, and he can't use the standard irrigation process, because it's on a hill. So it's essentially just a analogy to show how much God tended to Israel, how much attention he gave them, similar to this loved one in his vineyard, having had to planted it on a hill. He he builds a watchtower in the middle of it, which would be Jerusalem. This both the civil and the religious center point. And then he carved out of it a rock, basically a wine press out of pure stone, right? Carved. What is a wine press? So they'd sit and, either stomp on it or use some kind of mechanism to press the grapes, and then the juice would flow down and collect into a container. So the wine press is essentially let's see here. So wine press is basically a representation of the system and process that God had established, where man could bring forth the fruition of their fruits, right? Essentially that's what a wine press does, right? It converts a fruit and into something desirable or useful, like wine. Yeah.
It's
Right.
Combination of the fruits of your labor.
Right.
Figuratively and literally.
So, symbolically, the wine press is, the faithful man. It's a reward for the faithful man, whether it's inheritance, or, the worship conducted. It's basically the results of his fruit, which is either good or bad, right? Because a lot of times the wine press is used to as a delivering method for God's wrath as well. So then in verse 3 and 4, it says, the citizens of Jerusalem, people of Judah, judge between me and my vineyard. So the conversation now goes from, basically Isaiah speaking of his love for God and what he did, what he accomplished with Israel, to now it's God speaking. So going into a vision that he's received from God. And so God says, now citizens of Jerusalem and people of Judah, judge between me and my vineyard. What more could I have done for my vineyard that I haven't already done in it? So why, when I expected good grapes, did it produce wild grapes. So, the Lord's basically saying, what else could I have done for you guys? I gave you this fertile land. I paid attention to you. I made sure you had all the right, ingredients to grow into the useful fruit, or the fruit that, I set out to plant. And instead they grew up to be wild grapes.
Any of us who've tried to grow a garden or raise kids, it's like, get it.
Yeah.
Like, what else?
Get it down.
That's right.
So,
Isn't it disheartening when you equip them for success and then they flounder
yeah,
with your kids?
yeah.
So then they get grounded.
So now God says, now come, I will tell you what I will do to my vineyard. I will remove its hedges, and its grapes will be eaten up. I will break through its fence, and its vines will be trampled down. I will let it go to waste. It will be neither pruned nor hoed, but overgrown with briars and thorns. I will also order the clouds not to let rain fall on it. So the Lord continues to speak and begins to describe the consequences that Judah will receive. And those consequences are because Judah is now worthless, right? It didn't grow into the fruit that it was supposed to be. Whether it was, I don't know what different kind of grapes there are. Red grapes, sour grapes, yep.
Been there, done that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So regardless, it wasn't the grape that the grower had intended. So now it's basically worthless. Similar to, it's like the Lord, when I think about myself, and if the Lord brought me into the church, he would say, I brought you into the church, speaking in how I performed, I brought you in the church not just for your benefit, but for you to benefit the others here. But what have you contributed? You do not care for those here. You do not, or you do your own thing. You seldom come. So what use are you to this community? So, kind of translating that to, like myself, I probably struggle trying to be more involved in your guys' life. And my excuse is I got 3 kids and I'm too busy, but is that really a good excuse?
Sort of.
Well, it depends on how you look at it.
That's what I mean, exactly.
Maybe not on Wednesday or Saturday, but you serve there in that capacity to all of us, where maybe the rest of us or some of us don't. It's always harder to look out your own eyes and see your faults versus what we see in the blessing that you bring. So that self-examination, it's important, but it could be that two-edged sword where sometimes we beat ourselves up when we think we don't. We know that we miss his mark, but how we serve each other is maybe more so seen by others than yourself, clearer light. What Paul and Ruth do, and what each one of us,
And everybody has their own gift.
That's right. Yeah.
And there's different seasons in your life. When we had 5 little kids at home, it's like, okay, I can do Sunday school for this age group, but that's it. I'm not going to be able to be there this night, that night, that night. You still have to balance. In order to be your best at what you're doing, you still have to balance your responsibilities. Now that we don't have little kids at home, it's like, oh yeah, I can be there Thursday night, not a big deal.
Yeah,
So you have seasons in your life too.
that's true.
And
Yes.
I've been listening to Samuel, First Samuel in the car to and from work, the truck, you know, and the one thing that sticks out with what you're talking about is, goes back to the Lord in the sense where he looked at Saul, the people picked Saul, but God picked David because God sees the character of the heart, not the appearance of the man or what he does, it's the character of the heart. You know? So that's a good thing for us to remember is what is our character all about? What does God see inside versus outside?
Right. Yeah, and that was just how it kind of came home to me, you know, just Judah not being what God had set out for him, you know, and I think about it in my life, you know, what God has set us out to do, you know, what kind of fruit we're supposed to bear. And, you know, a lot of that is service to others. And I think that's where I fall short quite a bit. So then in verse 6, he talks about the hedge being removed. So, you know, back in the day, vineyards were, or, you know, some of the smaller crop fields were surrounded by a stone hedge, which they oftentimes would overgrow it with briars and thorns to prevent animals and, you know, things from either, you know, jumping over it or climbing up it. So it talks about removing the hedge, or basically the protection that God had provided, the security that God had provided Judah in Israel, and then basically the briars and thorns that, you know, once enveloped the hedges, because the vineyards no longer tended to now start to overgrow the vineyard. So what once was the protection and security of Judah has now became basically the downfall. So to put that in real terms, you know, God provided Judah and Israel security in their own land, and what did they do with it? They squandered it. They became lazy. They became worshipful of other idols. So it became really a stumbling block to Judah, and it brought up a quote I've heard, you know, I've came across in the past that hard times create hard people create soft times create soft people, and soft people create hard times. So, you know, we get to a point where we have such, you know, freedoms and security that we start becoming soft because we have nothing to challenge us, and something, you know, that we have to focus on in terms of survival and defending, you know, whatever it is we hold value, and we begin to become soft. So then, you know, now you look in our society and the things that we focus on, you know, gender, pronouns, I mean, and, you know, things that are a lot less important than, you know, say my dad or my grandpa's generation, because they didn't have time, or, you know, they didn't have time to think about those things, because if they didn't go out for the day and, you know, either reap harvest or chop firewood, then they wouldn't, you know, survive the next few days. So, and that's just how I thought about Judah. You know, they had this security that the Lord had provided, and in it they became soft. You know, they weren't diligent to hold to, you know, the periods where they did go through trials and they grew closer to God. They didn't hold to that relationship standard. So then in verse 8, well, in verse 7, he just describes, you know, what this vineyard is. So it's the house of Israel, the men of Judah. So in verse 8, he starts, the Lord starts going into these 6 woes that Judah Israel are both guilty of. So the first one is verse 8 through 10 says, "Woe to those who add house to house and join field to field, until there's no room for anyone else, and you live in splendor alone on your land. Adonai said in my ears, many houses will be brought to ruin. Large you probably almost say it like the Lord says, many houses, like this is what's going to happen. I don't know. Many houses will be brought to ruin, large magnificent ones left empty. For a 10-acre vineyard will produce only 5 gallons of wine, and seed from the 5 bushels of grain will yield but half a bushel." So what do you make of that, Will? What is that?
No return on investment.
No return on investment? What about,
Their lands are not producing.
okay. What does it mean to those who add house to house and join field to field until there's no room for anyone else? What's that?
Unjust accumulation.
Yeah, that's good.
Wealth for the sake of wealth, edging out neighbors or poor folks.
Yeah,
I'm gonna buy 20 acres and put up a fence and you don't get to see the water now because I have purchased all that land for
Right.
water.
and you remember they used to set a corner of their land for anybody to come and partake of. And that was no longer being performed.
Well,
How can they join houses? I mean, the original intent of the law was that, yes, someone could buy out someone's property, but then they would have to give them back after a certain period of time, so
Yep.
it sounds like they're no longer
Yeah,
doing that.
yeah, what was that called? Jubilee, yeah. Yeah, so in Jeremiah 34, 8 through 22, I'll just read it. This word came to Jeremiah from Adonai, the king of Zedekiah, had made a covenant with all the people in Jerusalem to emancipate them. Everyone who had a male or female slave who was Hebrew was to let him go free. None was to keep as his slave a fellow Jew. All the leaders and all the people listened who had entered into the covenant, wherein everyone was to free his male and female slaves and to keep them in bondage any longer. They listened and they let them go, but afterwards they changed their minds. They made the male and female slaves, whom they had freed, return, and they brought them back into subjection as slaves. Therefore, this word of Adonai came to Jeremiah from Adonai. Here's what Adonai, the God of Israel, when I brought your ancestors out of the land of Egypt, where they lived as slaves, I made this covenant with them. At the end of 7 years, every one of you is to set free his brother Hebrew who has been sold to you and has served you 6 years. You are to let him go free from you. But your ancestors did not listen to me or pay any attention. Now you repented. You did what is right from my viewpoint when each of you proclaimed freedom to his fellow, and you made a covenant before me in the house bearing my name. But then you changed your minds, you profaned my name, and when each of you took back his male or female slaves, whom you had set free to live as they wished, and brought them back into subjugation as your slaves. So that was part of Jubilee, was to return those who, sold themselves into servitude as bondservants. And that was done every 7 years. So they weren't observing that, and they weren't observing the return of property to its heritage family, which was done every 15 years. 50? Was it? Oh, okay. Oh, yeah, you're right.
So the crops would be rotated every 7 years, you said?
Yes. Was it 7? Yeah.
So
Yep.
you take 1 year, you grow for 7, and then you have a year that the land lays fallow, meaning you're not allowed to till it, plant it, you let the weeds
So
grow.
you do a different plot of land.
Right, so you rotate your fields, you rotate them. And then what happens is that field that has been left actually becomes more fertile, cause you till all that back in, and when you start your cycle again, it's fertilized, because everything that's grown is now tilled back into the soil.
You're replacing what you've taken into crops, so
Yeah.
the soil regenerates itself.
Is that done
Now?
today type of thing?
Not as much. Usually,
No,
how you
they
get the
add-
dust
They add
bowl.
stuff
Yeah.
to it.
yeah,
It depends on the farmer.
that's
It
right.
does.
They do with like winter crops. Some farmers will do like if they typically do I don't know corn, then through the winter months they'll plant a different crop that they do till in, and it exactly what it
Alfalfa
does.
or
It
something.
puts nutrients back in the soil, and it also prevents weeds from overtaking. So it kind of benefits into the area.
And it keeps water from eroding, so the topsoil doesn't wash away. But I know some farmers back home that still follow that. I don't know if they go by the 7-to-1, but they will rotate and let portions of the field, winter over and just not plant them, so.
Yeah. Yeah, and it depends on the crop too.
Yeah.
So basically, Judah has become greedy, right? They've stripped the poor, they've sent widows away, empty-handed, and they've obtained or kept their servants and not honored the law as well as the land. The next woe, in verse 11 through 17 says, "Woe to those who get up early to pursue intoxicating liquor, who stay up late at night until wine inflames them. They have lutes and lyres, drums and flutes, and wine at their parties, but they pay no attention to how Adonai works, and never look at what his hands have made. For such lack of knowledge my people go into exile. This is also why their respected men starve, and their masses are parched from thirst. Therefore, Sheol has enlarged itself and opened its limitless jaws, and down go their nobles and masses, along with their noise and revels. The masses are lowered, the nobles are humbled. Proud looks will be brought down, but Adonai is exalted through justice. God, the Holy One, is consecrated through righteousness. Then lambs will be able to feed as if they were in their own pasture, and those wandering through will eat from the ruined fields of the overfed." So basically, Judah, through their time of peace and security, has become obsessed with debauchery. It's interesting, if you remember in chapter 3, you remember when it was talking about how men were looking for someone within their own family to lead, and how men were either hard to find, and the ones that were hard to find were not of upstanding character, so hard to find leaders. So, and it says in here that where'd it go? That this is also why their respected men starve and their masses are parched from thirst. So, and it also mentions, briefly that this lack of knowledge. So they've traded knowledge for drink and partying, and for that they will be going into exile. So a brief mention, kind of looking forward into the exile, which we'll look at. And then the lambs, so it says the lambs will be able to feed as if they were in their own pasture, and those wandering through will eat from the ruined fields of the overfed. So what Judah basically hoarded and kept for themselves will now be basically torn from them and opened up for anybody passing through to enjoy. And we'll look at that further on in some of the upcoming chapters historically.
The wealthy and nobles and tradespeople were all removed, and so these lambs are the unskilled or the elderly or the otherwise unwanted people. Is that what you're saying?
I mean, from what we'll look at and what happened to Judah, I think it's speaking to, the people that are moving. Well, yeah, partly the artisans that they took, right? They're now using them for their own gain. But it says that the lamb will feed as if it was their own pasture. So they'll be able to, basically go into the land that was dedicated for Israel and Judah, and essentially it becomes their own land, which we'll look at. But yeah, I think that could speak to, as well as the those who were carried away. They basically being absorbed into Babylon and being producers towards Babylon now instead of Judah. All right, so we have debauchery. We'll do one more. So woe to those who begin by pulling at transgression with a thread, but end by dragging sin along as if with a cart rope. They say, we want God to speed up his work, to hurry it along so we can see it. We want the Holy One of Israel plan to come. We want the Holy One of Israel's plan to come true right now so we can be sure of it. So what is this speaking to?
Impatient.
Think so?
No, I just think of sometimes I'll have a hangy thing on my sock and I'll start pulling on it and it unravels and then you're like, just leave it alone. Then you get too far deep and you can't stop.
Been there.
Yeah, you start entertaining small concessions and then you end up dragging it along with a rope.
I would.
Almost sounds along the lines of, we're not really seeing, the Lord's, promises coming to fulfillment. So, where's God? What's he doing? We're not seeing any of this. Come on, hurry it up.
Yeah,
Prove it.
Yeah, prove it.
yes. If we want to see it now so we can believe it.
Yeah.
And
Right.
consequences.
It's very
Hey,
childish.
gosh, hurry.
Yeah. Well, I almost took it as scoffing towards God, right? Like it says they start off by pulling, look, here's a little transgression, God, what are you going to do about it? Because if you look, they're saying, we want God to speed up his work, to hurry it along so we can see it. We want a Holy One of Israel plan to come true right now so we can be sure of it. So it's almost like they're taunting God, you know, like they start off with these pulling on transgressions, and then it gets to a point where they're dragging out sin with a cart rope. I mean, to me, that when you're dragging something along with a cart rope, it's not stuck with you. You're actually working.
Like, what are you gonna do about it?
Yeah, you're working to carry it with you.
Okay.
And so, God, what do you know? Look at. I started out small. You didn't do anything. So,
So it's not an accidental descent
Yeah.
into transgression.
I think it's on
an
purpose.
intentional
right.
taunting.
Yes.
But isn't that a lot like what people do today? I can't tell you how many times I've seen someone look at their watch and go, Jesus is coming back when? Isn't he a little overdue?
Yeah.
You know, it's the same thing. It's like they're scoffing at, well, let's hurry it up. You know, he's supposed to be back. Let's get this done. And it's kind of like a lot of the mindsets today are that way.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, it's also, if I can see it, I might believe it, but if
Yeah.
I don't see it, why
No.
should I?
Right. Yeah. That's yeah.
I used to want Jesus to come back so I wouldn't have to sin anymore.
Same.
Because then it's like, oh, well, I'm just gonna keep doing it until I don't have to anymore.
Or I've got time.
Or
the
or
procrastinator.
or can you judge me now before I get too far? 'Cause then my judgment won't be as bad.
Yeah, exactly.
But if you let me go, then
Yeah, whose fault is it really?
yeah.
Yeah.
You made me. I just see children. I keep throwing it back to kids because kids do this so much. It really
Bothers you?
really bothers me, especially Jude. He'll be like, you know, do that thing like with the finger, like I'm not touching you, like I'm not. What are you gonna do about it?
And this is the point where Holly stops and says, oh my gosh, I am like my parents.
Same here. Guilty as charged.
Okay, so we'll stop there.
What's even worse is you realize you're just like Judah.
Thanks.
Because that's also a realization.
Okay. Any comments or questions?
Good reminder today. Thank you. It's a good smack upside the head. Appreciate that.
Now you're gonna touch my ear. She was doing
Pull the
that to
thread.
me Yesterday.
Isn't he annoying?
No worries.
All right.
He's my permission.
I guess we'll open or close in prayer.
You had to pull him down so that he couldn't grab anywhere near my head.
Father God, pray that you would be with those who are traveling with Pastor while him and his wife are gone, that you'd bless their trip, Lord. Pray for Hal and Deanna, for their continued healing, and that you would let them know that we're always thinking about them and wish they would be able to return at some point, Lord, to be with us. Lord, help us to be better servants of one another and of you, Lord, and I pray that you would help us to put aside those concerns that we have today of our life, of the world, Lord, and to focus on you and to give us an attitude of worship and praise. I pray that you would bless this time together today, Lord, and that our worship would be blessing to you. Amen.